Okay, recording is started, and I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so I guess we can get started. So hi everyone, thank you for coming and stopping by to learn a little bit more about the Common Application. So as a lot of you may know, the Common Application actually already opened back in August, and students should be starting to, get their materials together and all of their stuff for applying. So just really quickly, I wanted to say that you can follow us on Instagram, and you can also check out our website and our YouTube channel, especially our YouTube channel, just because we're going to be posting about this and other webinars that we have. So it's just a very good resource for any sort of recordings and stuff like that. And then our Instagram will just have a few updates about like what we're up to and things like that as well. And just a really quick thing about me. So I'm a third-year honors student at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor right now in my dorm room. And I am studying neuroscience on a pre-med track. So happy to answer any questions from anyone that's interested in U of M, for sure. So just to start off, here's a little bit of a table of contents, if you will, of the stuff that I'm going to be covering. So to start off with, we're gonna just have an overview of what the Common Application looks like, just in general. It's kind of like a website in a sense, so you'll just look through it and see the different tabs and things like that. Then we're going to go into the essay section. So essays are a big part of your college application in general. So you have to, be prepared to write obviously your main essay, but then you also have your supplemental essays that are important as well. So we're going to go into some advice for that. And also we're going to have a brainstorm. So the best thing you would be able to do during this period of time would be to maybe get like pen and paper out or something like that. And just jot down a couple of your thoughts while we go through the different prompts. And then for extracurriculars and letters of recommendation, I'm going to go really briefly into the kinds of different categories, kind of what they're looking for, how you should write your categories and hours and commitment, and stuff like that. And then for letters of recommendation, I'm going to talk about FERPA, and I'm also going to talk about how you can set yourself up for asking for a really good letter of recommendation. And then at the end, I'm going to have some time for questions and answers. So yeah, we'll get right into it with an overview. So this is their new logo on the right. They changed it up since I applied. It's pretty nice, I think. So you would log in initially and you would get an account on this website, right? And what you would put in is just your name and some basic family information, education information, stuff like that. So as you can see kind of on this left-hand tab, those are all of the different tabs you have. So you have your profile, you have the tab for your family. So that's going to ask a little bit about did your family go to school? If so, how much school and stuff like that. Then there's education, testing, activities, writing, and all that other stuff as well. So we're going to be going into those different sections as we go along. Oh, I'm gonna let someone into the waiting room, sorry. Okay, so the first thing would be education. So this kind of is a very important section because not all schools are created equal in a sense. So if you went to, for example, a really big high school versus going to a very small high school, obviously if you're the top of your class at a bigger high school, that looks even better than if you're, 1 out of 30 students versus 1 out of 600 or 1,000 students, right? So this is just to give a little bit of context to your application when the people are looking at it. So you're going to talk about your graduating class size, and all of this information should be things that you get from your high school counselor. Ideally, they will provide it to you in some sort of document form so that you have not only your rank, if your school ranks you in terms of top students and stuff like that, but it will also tell you how many students there are, maybe what the average scores and stuff like that are. And it will just be called a class profile. So not every school does that, but if your school offers it, I would ask for it. So the next portion is going to be the activities portion. And this is just going to be basically what you did outside of studying. So it's going to be any sort of clubs and stuff like that. And I think a lot of times people think that it only has to be things that you did in school, but that's not necessarily true. For example, if you volunteer at like a religious organization or something like that, you can put that as well. Everything is encouraged, you know, as long as you're volunteering or doing something to help out your community or stuff like that. I don't necessarily think that it has to just be associated with school. So it doesn't have to just be sports or like an after school club or stuff like that. And another thing that people really forget to highlight on their application is if they've ever had a job or worked. Um, that shouldn't be looked down upon at all. People have different circumstances and stuff like that. And some people need to work to support themselves and their families during high school. So I think in those kinds of scenarios, it's really good actually to provide them with kind of an insight of how many hours a week you worked and stuff like that. So they can realize that, wow, like this person worked 20 hours a week while being a student. I mean, that's not something that everyone can do, right? So that's definitely something you want to highlight if that applies. So the next thing is my colleges. So what you will do is ideally you should kind of, if you're applying the cycle, already have an idea of what schools you want to apply to. But if maybe you're still not sure or you want to add a couple more schools to your list, they actually have a thing on the Common App itself where you can go and search up schools. You basically can go and say like, I want something in like this region of the US with this kind of like score range and GPA range and stuff like that, and so on and so forth. And then you can curate that list and get an idea of, oh, maybe these are some schools that I hadn't considered before, but they're, you know, something that I can apply to potentially. So it's really good to get an idea of what schools you want to apply to. And it's also good to get an idea of a broad range of schools. So what that means is you want to have schools that are maybe below your stats, like your GPA, your test scores and stuff like that, just in case. Those are called safeties. Then you want to have ones that are what we call matches. And those are schools that people score very similarly to you, people got very similar grades to you, and they were accepted. And then you'll have reaches. And for most people, reaches kind of vary. Like if someone was a very good student in high school, maybe like top of their class and stuff like that, an Ivy League school would still obviously be a reach. And in some cases, maybe even a top 25 school would be a reach. I mean, college applications are getting more and more competitive. And especially this cycle with COVID and stuff like that, it's going to be looking a little bit different than previous years because a lot of students haven't had the opportunity to take their standardized tests because they kept getting canceled. So that's just another thing to consider. I would recommend applying to kind of as many schools as you think is financially feasible for you. And I think another thing that you should check into if maybe it isn't feasible for you to apply to that many schools is to contact their departments where like it's admissions or something like that, and to see if they have any sort of fee waivers available. So fee waivers are going to waive the application fee to just apply to that school. And application fees can quickly get very expensive. So some of them are between $50 to $75 per school. So obviously if you're applying to like 10 schools, that makes a lot of money. So if you can explain to them maybe your financial situation in a little bit and tell them about why you really do want to apply, I would say most schools do set aside funds for that so that you can, you know, adequately apply to their school without having to worry about paying for it. Okay. So the next thing you'll see is once you have added the colleges that you're interested in, so for example, this person was interested in Duke, you will have all of this show up under it once you've added it to your My Colleges. And it will have the questions, then it'll have recommenders and FERPA, And the review and submit button, you should not click until your application is completely ready and you're willing for people to look at and read your application. So leave that to the very end and make sure everything else is done and submitted first. So another thing here, we'll touch on this a bit more because we are going to touch upon letters of recommendation, but just to give you a quick idea, letters of recommendation kind of vary, but you should check about your schools and see how many they require. At least when I did it, a lot of times they say recommended for having 2 letters of recommendation for a school. I know that it says recommended, but for the most part, recommended in college applications means required, because other applicants that do it are going to be at an advantage to applicants that don't. And you want to, have as many advantages as you possibly can in an application process because it's a very competitive process. So if there's anything that can, give you like an added edge or something like that, and it's completely free. So really there's no downside, I think, to adding your letters of recommendation if you already have them. Then the writing. So this part is going to show you which require the Common App essay, which they call here the personal essay. For the most part, most schools will require it anyway. So you're probably going to have to end up writing it regardless of if maybe some of your schools don't require it, because even if one of your schools requires it, you're going to have to submit it and write it. But that's really, that's really one of the ones that you want to make sure is absolutely set and like ready to go. Just because if it's not, you're going to run into some problems in terms of your timeline for applying to schools. And then these questions are basically the essays that the different schools will ask you. So this really varies from school to school, but after a while you start to notice there's a little bit of some trends perhaps in the kind of questions that they ask, even though they are from different schools. For example, when I applied to U of M, one of the questions was on a community that you belong to. And I'm sure as people go through the college application process, you'll see a lot of schools have that similar prompt, maybe worded a different way, but it still kind of is there and remains. And keep in mind the word limits. So schools have different word limits for their different prompts. It's usually 250. And sometimes it's characters instead of words, which is kind of, it's not nice, right? But just keep that in mind and you want to make sure that you stick to it. Okay, so now we are going to get into the essay. But if anyone has questions in the meantime, please pop them into the chat. Okay, so this is the part that I said would be a really good point in which you want to maybe get out a pen and paper or whatever you're working on, maybe even like your laptop or something like that. And just use this as an opportunity to brainstorm, your different things. So this is probably one of the most important parts of your application because everything else they can already see about you. So they can already see your grades, they can already see stuff about your school, your test scores, but this essay is really an opportunity for them to get to know your personality. So a lot of people, they're very good students, they are very academically focused, they do a good job with their extracurriculars, but this is, that moment where you show that you're more than just a student, that you are, a member of a community, that you care about doing things, that you're a good person, all of those kinds of things that they want to see, on a campus. So yeah, basically the Common App essay prompts are, I'm just going to go through them really quickly and then we're going to go one by one. So what I would kind of recommend for this is that you take notes. I have some guiding questions for each of them. So if you could just like take notes on like what comes to mind for each of those questions, that would be best. And then I see we do have a question about if they have letters of recommendation needed, can you still send? That depends on the school. I would say that if they don't say that it's recommended, most of the time they still will accept 1 to 2, but some schools have already asked for 3 and sometimes they recommend or require it. So make sure that you pick which ones you're sending. If it's like a community college or maybe something like that, where they usually typically don't ask for one, I think it doesn't hurt to send one. I don't know that I would send all three though, but I mean, it's totally up to you and it's completely automated. It doesn't really cost you anything. If anything, it's just going to be one more paper that they just have to look at. So I think it's not going to be like a massive difference in general. Yeah, good question though. Okay, so the first prompt is, like I said, about like background, identity, interests, talents, all that kind of stuff. The second prompt is basically about obstacles or challenges. The third prompt is about reflecting on a time where you questioned or challenged a belief or an idea. The fourth prompt is describing a problem that you've solved. Then these prompts are about accomplishments and growth, lessons, and something that, you know, maybe you just find really interesting and you study a lot or look at a lot in your free time. And then the last one is kind of make your own essay. So if it doesn't maybe fit into one of those prompts, but you think that it would be something that describes you a little bit more accurately, I would say for most people, this is a place to be creative for sure for your Common App essay because you want to stand out from other people, but it is not a place to be risky. So you don't want to do something that, you know, could go one way or another. You don't want to say anything that's very polarizing. And so I think a lot of times when people have their own prompt, that makes it a little bit easier to kind of stray out of what they're looking for. So I think if you stick to one of the prompts, that would be better. I mean, of course, I'm going to encourage you to, if you have a creative idea, go with an essay on any topic. But I think that they have like a pretty good range from the topics that are given that really show who you are as a person. So I would try to go with one of those first. And like I said, I'm going to go through a couple of guiding questions for each of these. So write down a couple of sentences or ideas. It doesn't have to be anything long. This is just to help you brainstorm. It could be just something you scribble at and like look at later and just to jog your memory. It doesn't have to be anything formal. You're not submitting anything. But I just found it to be very helpful. So the first topic is the one with the background, the identity, interest, or talent. And so here are some guiding questions for that. And I'm going to give each of you a couple of seconds, you know, maybe take a photo on your phone or write this down just so that you have it. It will be recorded and sent to you, but I mean, it's nice to do it now since you already took the time. So the first guiding question is, what about my history or my background sets me apart from my peers? So maybe like you've been a recent immigrant, or maybe your family comes from a different country or something like that, or maybe you even come from a different country. And maybe you came here recently or you came here a while ago. That's definitely something that you can talk about at some point. And then the next guiding question would be, how do I define myself? And how do the people who are closest to me define me? So I think this is a really good one, even if you just get like a couple of buzzwords or what they call buzzwords out of it. So those are just like adjectives, basically, that just sound really good. Like if you asked your friend to describe you and stuff like that, they might say some like funny stuff just to like joke, but they also should say things like, oh, like this person's really determined, or this person is really, you know, driven or committed or something like that. And those are all really good words. Obviously, when you write your essay, you're not going to go ahead and say, you should let me in because my friend said I'm determined. But it's still a good starting point to say, like, this is how other people perceive me and how my community perceives me. And then the next thing would be, what have I achieved that's been integral to molding my character and ambitions? So this is a great opportunity, right, to talk about what your background has, how your background has affected you and what you want to do with your life and maybe your future. I know for a lot of people that it's a little bit of a hard question to answer exactly onto what you want to do in your future. And college is, yes, a place to kind of explore what you want to do. But the sooner you get that, you know, idea and that trajectory, the better. So I would really try to start exploring senior year and kind of narrowing down kind of what career you do want to do, just so that it's easier for you. By all means, you can change your major. I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but at least having a general idea, make sure that you don't have to spend so much more money by, going to school for longer than you need to, or retaking classes or stuff like that. At the end of the day, yes, you do want to do something you're passionate about, but you should also be realistic at the same time. And I think that that's something that you should come to terms with. So a lot of times, like, people might major in something that people perceive as maybe not as important. I don't necessarily want to say that you shouldn't then major in those things, but I will say that you just need to be mindful that it's maybe a little bit more competitive to get a job. For example, like if you majored in like sociology or something, or psychology, um, great, lots of career prospects, but you just need to know that you need to start thinking about what you want to do with that sooner than maybe somebody else. And then, yeah, so the last one is really just what experiences have shaped you. Okay, so next topic, hope you guys are, jotting some things down, is about the lessons that we take from obstacles that you've encountered. So these can be, overarching obstacles maybe throughout your whole life, like maybe if you've struggled with a chronic illness or someone in your family has, or maybe if you've had to take care of your siblings, or you struggled with adapting to like maybe like learning English or something like that. That's all stuff that you can talk about in some way. But the important thing of prompts like this is that you kind of show how you struggled, and then you show how you overcame that struggle. And I think that that's the most important aspect that a lot of people maybe neglect when they are writing their kind of prompts for this. And then let's see what else to keep in mind. You can also talk about maybe some of the major challenges that you've encountered in your life, kind of, what we've talked about. You can also talk about maybe minor things, relatively speaking, minor, in the scale of things, like maybe, oh, you got a bad grade or something like that, which in the large scale of things is not a big deal. But, maybe that is something that really, oh, I changed my mind about something because I got a bad grade in this class. That's, something to talk about for sure. Okay, so for topic 3, we're going to talk about reflecting on a time where you questioned or challenged a belief or an idea. So this one can get a little bit dicey to an extent, because you want to make sure that what you say is obviously very true to you and your opinions and your thoughts, but you also don't want to say something that's really controversial, because you don't know who's reading your essay. So it could be someone that, yes, has the same like beliefs as you, maybe like political or otherwise, right? But it could also be someone that does not have those beliefs. And as much as they say that, college admissions and stuff like that should be, without bias, at the end of the day, these people are human. So they do have biases, and you want to make sure that you don't, as much as possible, you don't have to, do something that will cause them to have any sort of bias towards you. And then some guiding questions for this would be, when has your opinion been unpopular? Why are you the kind of person who's willing to stand up for what you believe in? What is important to you on a fundamental level of morals and values? And how passionate are you? So I'm just going to take a drink of water because a lot of talking. So this is just a really good opportunity for you to talk about a little bit more of what's important to you. So for example, if you're really passionate about, maybe human rights or like advocacy or stuff like that, I think, as a lot of people that are, multicultural, like by virtue of their experiences, are very, well tuned and well versed, just because you've experienced those things. So for that reason, more than anything, you have those values already. So I think it's a very good prompt for you to kind of reflect Okay. So this fourth one is about describing a problem that you've solved or a problem that you'd like to solve. And it can be an intellectual challenge, research query, ethical dilemma, or anything. And then explain the significance to you and what steps you took. So for this one, I know that it says that maybe problem you'd like to solve, but for the most part, try to keep it to a scale where you've done something. So for example, people might say, I'd like to solve, world hunger. And it's a completely admirable goal. It's a great goal, but so many people have been working towards it for years. And what's the difference between someone saying, I would like to do it versus actually doing something? At the end of the day, I think most people would agree that everyone would want, in a perfect world, no one to be hungry, no one to be, without a home, without stuff like that. But this essay at the end of the day is not about what should be and what the world should be. It's about you and how you are going to fit in at a college. So I think that you can use those issues as kind of a starting point, but it shouldn't be like the entire basis of your essay. And in terms of like maybe some examples of things, maybe if you did do like research in high school and stuff like that, you could talk about that a little bit. I would say that maybe don't focus your entire essay on just maybe like a science project that you did, because that's great, but maybe it doesn't have like a massive impact. I think the most important thing about these kinds of topics is that you need to have a tangible product at the end of it, whether that means that, oh, I presented this to X amount of people and I helped this many people and so and so, and so on and so forth. So really you just want to be able to, in any way that works for you, depending on your thing, quantify it. Okay, so this one is a nice one. So it talks about discussing an accomplishment, event, or realization that sparked a period of personal growth. So personal growth is good. They love to see personal growth. Everyone, makes mistakes and stuff like that. Oh, actually, I'm going to stop really quickly because we do have a question. So someone asked, what if you and your friends started a nonprofit that gives back to the community? Well, absolutely, that's something tangible for sure. I mean, speaking as someone that started one as well, I definitely think that that's something that people look for. I think another thing to keep in mind, though, is that a lot of times about starting a nonprofit, you want to make sure that you do have an impact that you can talk about. Because I don't know if you've been like checking like Instagram and stuff like that recently. And by all means, it's a good thing that young people are getting started on, nonprofit work and stuff like that. But at the same time, they can also tell if you just started it just to have something to say for your college applications, which by no means am I implying that's you at all. I'm just saying that if you did start an organization and you have a genuine interest in stuff like that, you will have, maybe a couple of things to show for it. Like, for example, I'm not exactly sure in which way you're helping the community because I'm not, familiar with your organization, but depending on what it is, like maybe like it's like, let's say books or something like that. You can say, I gave this many books, it helped this many students, and we've been around for this many months or something like that. Okay, yeah, so absolutely. So you can talk about maybe how many people you've helped, maybe what impact that had on their lives, stuff like that. Maybe some personal experiences you've had by maybe interacting and stuff like that. So I think that that's a really good thing to talk about, but you just need to, like I said, be tangible with it. So you just need to say like, I helped this much, I did this much, this many hours. And it's really hard, I know, when people are passionate about things to keep track of how much they've committed to it. I make the same mistake all the time. I don't really, distinguish between when I'm just doing something versus when I'm doing something for my organization and I'm like counting it for like volunteer hours and stuff like that. And so I think to the best of your ability, do try to get a ballpark estimate of how much you've committed to it and what you've done, like I said, tangibly. I hope that helps. So for the next topic, it's going to be about an accomplishment, event, or realization, like I talked about. So this could be, how would you react to any sort of period of transition? So that could be, moving. It could be going to a new school. It could be something else like that. And then what inspires a change in your perspective? Maybe it's meeting someone that has, maybe completely different thoughts and beliefs than you. Or it could be, maybe a teacher or someone that's really influential to you, and maybe you didn't consider something a certain way before, or maybe you didn't like a subject before, and then you had that teacher and they've really changed your perspective. And then when you have a eureka moment and how it impacted the way that you lived your life, for me, at least personally, I would say a lot of times it's not exactly one moment. And I think that a lot of times people think that, oh, one day I'm just going to sit here and this great idea is going to fall upon me. But for a lot of people, it's not how it works. It's a lot of trial and error and trial and error until you figure out something that does actually work and solve maybe a problem. And then what are moments in life that fundamentally changed you? And when did you learn something that made you feel more adult, more capable, more grown up? So I think that this is a great prompt, but like I said before, it kind of does touch a lot on, community and growth and stuff like that. So as you can see, I mean, all of these prompts, they do have a different central premise, but at the end of the day, they're really all just trying to find a little bit more about you. And then topic 6 is about a topic, idea, or concept that's really engaging to you. So I think that this is a great prompt for someone that maybe has a set idea of what they want to do with their life. It's very difficult. A lot of people necessarily don't when they're 18 or 17 years old when they're applying, right? It's very hard to just tell a 17-year-old and say, this is what you're going to dedicate the next 10 years of your life to doing. But we do it, and that's just the way that things are. So if you do have, goals, maybe aspirations, stuff like that, like let's say maybe for me, I want to be a doctor, right? So you could talk about that, talk about your experiences, maybe why that field, why that school, maybe. You don't want to cater your common application essay to any school, just quick note, because you're going to send it to all the schools. So please don't mention any sort of thing like, I love the University of Michigan's, neuroscience program, and don't just put that in your common application essay because it's going to get sent to Duke or maybe even Ohio State. So in that case, like you just really don't want to mention it because you're going to step on some toes. But yeah, so this is a really good one. Also, if you've had like any sort of like mentorship or stuff like that, you can talk about how it impacted you. Any positive role models in your life. It can be people that are familiar to you. It could be like your parents are role models, but make sure that you bring it back to you, even if it is about them, because they want to hear about you. And then, like I said, so this is the kind of category that isn't a category. And basically you can come up with your own sort of prompt or maybe adapt one of the ones from before. Like I said, this one is kind of a little bit more creative. So it also lends itself a little bit more to maybe straying away from what they're looking for. But yeah, okay. I do see that we do have some questions, but for some reason I can't see the chat right now. So just give me one sec. Okay, the question is, would it be okay to talk about how you went through mental illness issues and how you grew from it? Yeah, well, I mean, in a perfect world, yes, they shouldn't discriminate against you. And all schools do have they do technically have to not discriminate against you. But unfortunately, the way that things are, mental illness and other disabilities are still pretty actively discriminated against, maybe not explicitly, but implicitly in terms of biases. So really, unfortunately, I think that it would be best to not discuss those kinds of things, especially because like maybe you're comfortable with talking about it, but would you be comfortable with maybe like the 20 admissions people all reading about it and knowing you about it and stuff like that? It depends. For some people, that's okay. For some people, it's not okay, and they would rather people didn't know about it, like that many people didn't know about it, because it's not going to stay private. There's, 20, 25 people in a room talking about your application per school. But really, I think that's a personal call. Yeah, that would be my thing. Okay, so now we're going to talk about extracurriculars and letters of recommendation. So for extracurriculars, you will first go in, like I showed you initially with the overview. You'll go in and you will pick a category that it falls into. That could be like arts, it could be like volunteering, etc. Kind of just depends on what you did. And then for activities, I know they say you don't need to fill all 10, but as many as you can fill in would be ideal. And then for timing and dedication, you want to pick activities, ideally, that you have committed to for a long amount of time. That doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be for all 4 years or 3 years. It depends on your high school, sorry. At least at my school, it was 4 years, but I realize that's not universal. You want to pick activities that you've done for maybe, I would say minimum of 1 year. So don't pick something that you just started senior year, or maybe you could do something maybe the summer before you started senior year and count that still. But I would say best thing would be something that you've done junior year and before, so that they can see that you've done something with it for a long amount of time before you're applying, because you apply, your senior year. Okie doke, sorry, just letting some people in. Anyway, so you also want to have an idea of maybe how many hours per week you would dedicate to it. So for a lot of people, that's a little bit hard. And unfortunately, I don't really have a lot of good news for you on that. I mean, if any of you are earlier in your high school career, I would say then this is a great time to get started on writing how many hours you dedicate to things. But if you're already a senior and you're applying, it's kind of a little bit too late for that. But try your best to kind of remember how many hours per week and be reasonable. Don't go and say, I think I spend 25 hours a week on this club. Be realistic. I mean, they are going to obviously give you the benefit of the doubt, but if someone has 80 hours a week of extracurriculars, they might be like, I don't necessarily think that this is true. Something is getting exaggerated. We don't know what. And then for description, you want it to be concise because they don't give you that much space mostly. But you also want to include details. So like I said, you want to really quantify your impact. Like maybe you started a club or something like that, and you started off with 15 members, very small club. And then, I mean, unless you have a small school, in that case, it's a normal club. And you started with 15 members, and now you have 70 members. That would be something to talk about. Or like maybe if you did something like HOSA or DECA or any one of those kinds of professional things, you could talk about like, oh, I won like something at regionals, or I got a medal or something like that. That would be stuff to talk about. Okay, and then some general advice for extracurriculars would be that you should use stronger verbs. So for example, you can use verbs like, I organized this, I ran this, I brainstormed, I coordinated. It sounds much better than saying I was a part of, or I was in, or I did. It's just they're human, they're looking at it really quickly. It's just the way that it is. It's the same thing with a resume. And then for showcasing your skill set, you want to show how you developed different skills. This doesn't have to be explicitly stated. Like you don't want to just go ahead and say, I was in this community service club and it taught me how to be caring. You don't want to do something like that. You want the experience to speak for itself, that, oh, you did community service, so you're caring, you're empathetic, you give back to your community, stuff like that. That's going to just be implied by you doing community service. So it's not something you need to go out of your way to say. And then for demonstrating value, what did you and your community gain from this experience? So that's a really important thing too, like I said before. Everyone, would like to think that maybe they have like a massive impact, and maybe in some cases you do, and maybe in some cases you don't. But the point is that you do need to be realistic. You can't just go ahead and say, I helped 5,000 people just because you feel like it, because they do go back and verify things. And if they don't catch it initially, they do audit your files while you're in college every couple of years, and maybe even after you're out of college, and you can actually lose your degree for lying. So I would make sure that you try to keep it as truthful as possible because you really don't want to seem like you're disingenuous. And especially you don't want your letters of recommendation to conflict with anything you said. And so for your letters of rec, like I said before, you need to check which schools do have the requirement of getting letters of recommendation. You also want to pick ahead of time which people you want to write it. Usually that means non-family members, so don't ask your mom, your cousins, your aunt, your uncle, etc. to write you a letter of recommendation. It's great, but they're biased. They think that you're amazing. I mean, I'm sure you probably are, but they need to see someone that maybe has a more objective point of view. So like a teacher, maybe someone that was in charge of a community service event with you or something like that, that was an adult. And that's something that you can, think about and what works best for you. And I think that a really good piece of advice for that specifically would be to pick someone that maybe you have an academic sort of relationship with because you've taken their class, but maybe also you have maybe they're also in charge of helping you with a club, or they are also in charge of running a project with you or something like that. So that way that they kind of like two in one. They can write you a letter of recommendation and talk about your qualities both in a classroom and outside of the classroom. So it's just really good because you do only have a limited number of letters of recommendation. It would just be better. And then for FERPA, so that's actually something that you will on Common App see that you can waive or not waive. So basically that just gives you the right, if you do not waive it, it gives you the right to look at your letters of recommendation and what was written about you and stuff like that. I understand it can be really tempting to be like, I want to see what they said about me, but colleges really, really look down on it. So you have to check that box. I'm not saying you have to actually, but in most cases it's recommended that you waive your FERPA just so that they can make sure that whatever is being written about you is really accurate and not just said because they know that you're going to read it. Okay. And then this is just some additional tips for letters of recommendation. So you want to prepare materials beforehand. So for example, at my school, what we did is seniors before we started senior year, actually, in the summer, you would work on maybe just a list of a couple of activities that you've done, things you've worked on, maybe things that you want mentioned about you in your letter of recommendation. And then we would go ahead and give that to the people that were writing our letters of recommendation. And it really sped up the process quite a bit because they had a paper to look at. And at the end of the day, maybe they really only know you for an hour a day. And how much does someone really know you for an hour a day? This is just a really good way for them to know more about you and what you do outside of their class. And then the other thing you want to do is follow up, but you do want to be nice about it because at the end of the day, they are taking time out to write you a letter of recommendation and you don't ever want to be rude because they're doing you a favor and they don't have to. So you want to make sure that you follow up, very politely, very, candidly, if it's coming close to maybe the deadline and they don't have it in. And you just need to let them know, hey, my letter of recommendation is, the deadline is coming up and you need to, if you need any more materials or stuff like that, I can definitely supply those to you. I just wanted to let you know that the deadline will be such and such day and such time. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. And right now we're just going to go into questions and answers in case anyone has some sort of lingering questions from what I talked about, or maybe potentially if you joined late or something like that and aren't sure about something. So please do put that in the chat and I will just wait for that. Okay, so next question we have is, are we not allowed to see letters of recommendation when they write it? So technically, no. If you do waive your FERPA, you can't see it. Depends on your relationship with the person that is, writing your letter of recommendation. Like, for example, if you do have like a pretty close relationship with them, then you could, for example, say, hey, can I get a copy of that or something of that nature? And they should give it to you if you were close. If you're not close, they can totally refuse that. So I don't want to necessarily say that you'll never be able to see it. You might be able to see it, but I wouldn't count on it if you did waive it. And then, okay, so next question is, so if you started something like a club during senior year, it's not going to be worth mentioning. Okay, so I'm just going to put this in perspective. So I'm not going to say that you shouldn't mention it at all, but realistically, if you're applying for schools like early, which you should, because early is better, then, you know, it's like October-ish, November. So really, how many months into senior year is that? Not a lot. So if you started something senior year, they really have maybe a month max of what you've done with that club. So realistically, it's just not going to look that good because they're going to say, oh, this is very last minute. Maybe they wanted to do something just to show, oh, I did something. Realistically, if you started it maybe in the summer, I would say that's fine. If you started it like August, I would say that's probably really not enough time. But if you do have space, I would put it. Okay. Okay, that's a good question. So the next question is, do you have to start a club or is becoming an officer good enough? So I think this also depends on the kinds of schools you're shooting for. So for example, a lot of schools have different values, and I think this is something that you can kind of get a vibe on by talking to admissions people. Maybe if they come to your school, and if they don't come to your school, try to schedule something or email them, because demonstrated interest is very important. I don't want to say that it's not important to start a club, because I would say they do like to look for initiative, because a lot of people can at some point move and work their way up to being an officer just because someone's graduated and they have, you know, no one else maybe to fill that spot. So I think it's a good thing, of course, to have leadership, but it shows even more leadership to start something. And that's kind of what they're looking for. Don't start something just to start something. If there's already something established and it's very similar, I think that it's not a good idea. Yeah, I guess that's more of an opinion. And then, so next question is, do religious clubs and activities affect any potential bias that they may have? So I don't really think I may be the correct person to answer this. I think that religion is a big part of a lot of people's identity. So I don't think that you should try to hide it in any sort of way. What I was talking about in terms of maybe like controversial opinions is not one that's really tied to your identity, but maybe just opinions. These are beliefs. I don't think you can change your beliefs, and I don't think that you should want to hide your beliefs either. You should ideally be in a place where people are accepting of your beliefs, and if they're not accepting of your beliefs, then that's not really an environment that you want to be in, right? So yeah, so that's my opinion on that. Controversial opinions are things you want to stay away from, but beliefs are not under that. Okay, next question. What about clubs outside of school? Yeah, clubs outside of school, great. Start them. Why not? I mean, I started two things this summer and also the National Pre-Health Conference this summer as well. Great idea. Why not? Okay, let's see. Already in college, but will be transferring. Okay, yeah. So transferring from community college.
The second part is at the bottom. So it's like I'm already in college, but I'll be transferring. What about me? And so what can I show? Because I was in community college, so transferring into a university, like what do I show? Like I did like volunteer hours in extracurricular in like 9th, 10th, 11th, and 8th grade summer, but like I don't know if that's like I don't know what to do, and I don't know how to compile it. I always get confused.
Yeah, okay, for sure. So transfer applications are going to be a little bit different than, you know, a conventional sort of like high school application. So they're going to kind of look for a little bit, like, in a sense, different things, but in a sense, the same. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit for you. So what they're really going to look at is if you did really well in your classes at community college. So I don't know how long you've been in community college, but for example, if you've been maybe a semester or a couple of semesters and you've gotten good grades, that's a great thing. Because at that point, after you're already in community college, very few schools will ask for your test scores from high school. Especially after a certain point, if you've already been in community college for more than a year, for example, they're not going to be like, oh, what's your SAT, what's your ACT? Or even if they do, they're not going to factor it in as much as when you would be applying from high school. Another thing to consider is it also really depends a lot on the schools that you're applying to. Some are a little bit more competitive in terms of what they're looking for from a person. Like, for example, like transferring is not created equal. Like, I know people that have transferred to my school, for example, and it's relatively hard, but it would be insurmountably much harder if you wanted to go ahead and transfer to maybe like an Ivy League school or something of that nature. For obvious reasons, they don't want to just let people in that are, they've done a year and, oh, now they can find like an easy way in. I think it's understandable. It's completely fair. They're just being transparent. And it's really going to depend on just how many seats that they have available. I think that's another thing that people need to consider when they're thinking of transferring, that they only do have a limited amount of seats for transfer students, at every school. So maybe you are a really good applicant, but at the end of the day, they're still, they're still going to consider that. Okay, so you said U of H. I'm not particularly sure. I'm not from Texas. But I would imagine, I don't want to give you a number and be wrong. I would imagine that they always do take a little bit of a higher percentage than whatever their acceptance rate is for transfer students, as opposed to maybe regular application from high school. That's not necessarily always the rule, but for the most part. Okay, and the next question is the app completely free? No, it's not. That's probably one of the biggest downfalls, maybe. So there's a lot of actually big costs for applying maybe as a transfer student, applying like through high school. Either way, there are fees. The fees may be different in terms of the amount, but there are going to be fees. So you have to have your application fee for sure. Again, that totally depends on the school. Sometimes it's $20, sometimes it's $100. Depends on the school. I can't tell you for every single school off the top of my head. Then you have your fees for sending all of your transcripts. You have the fees for sending all of your test scores and all of that. And if you qualify for financial assistance or some sort of like subsidization of your costs, they do allow you to apply to a certain number of schools for free, but you do have to qualify financially, and you need to make sure that that's already sorted, maybe with your counselor or someone else that can help you with the paperwork, because it's a little bit complicated. And you need to make sure that's sorted as soon as possible, especially if you're applying right now. Like, sort it right now. That would be my advice. Okay, any more questions, anybody? Keep them coming.
Can you tell us what the app was again?
Yeah, sure. I'm not exactly sure what application your question was referring to, so I talked about both kind of broadly. So Common Application, Coalition, the Texas applications for Texas schools and stuff like that. All of them have the same fees. They might be different in the monetary amount, but you do have fees for everything. So I guess kind of it really doesn't matter what application, you're just gonna have fees. Okay, so next question is, Would you recommend applying before priority scholarship, even if your grades will boost after this semester? It depends on the scholarship. So some scholarships, like they do have like a GPA requirement, right? If you meet that GPA requirement, then no problem, go ahead and apply. If you don't, then you do have to wait, unfortunately, I think. But I think if you don't meet like a GPA requirement for a certain scholarship, it doesn't hurt to apply early regardless, because usually they'll find maybe some aid in a different way. So for example, like for financial aid at like my school, they do give like very similar financial aid packages to regular decision and early action or decision. But in terms of grants and scholarships and stuff like that, at the end of the day, they do have like a pool of how much money they can give each year to students. So just logistically speaking, the earlier you are, the better of a chance you have at getting more money. And the later you are, the less of a chance, because maybe someone's already taken it. So that would be my advice. Okay, so great job, guys. I'm going to stay on for a little bit after this, but I am going to stop recording just so that the recording is about an hour.